So I want to invite Superintendent Garcia to provide you all with an additional update related to the Crash Review Board and the internal investigation.
Good evening, Council President, City Councilors. I received the minutes from the Fleet Crash Review Board on Chief Medina's crash, and the board ruled the accident non-preventable. And I cannot speak to the crash investigation itself.
Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Did you say that the accident is already deemed non-preventable?
Council President, Councilor Sanchez. Yes, sir.
I don't understand how it could be deemed unpreventable when you can tell that Medina's truck was accelerating into the vehicle that he hit. Not only that, Medina could have made a stop right there in an undercover vehicle while there was a police activity taking place and used his police abilities to make an arrest before this even happened. If he was in an undercover vehicle, how, and that person, or who the offenders were, had no idea who he was, how do you determine that it was not preventable? It was preventable from the start. If the chief would have made a police action and executed his police powers and made an arrest immediately, we would not have a traffic accident, we would not have an investigation. How can you say that this is not preventable?
Council President, Councilor Sanchez, I cannot speak to the ruling from the Crash Review Board. We do have Sergeant Burton from the Fatal Crash Team that can speak to the crash itself if you'd like to speak to him. But I did not attend the Crash Review Board. I'm not part of the Crash Review Board, so I can't give you any information as to why they came to that decision.
Mr. President, did you not ask the question of the Crash Review Board as to how this took place? You're the boss. You're in charge of this investigation. So immediately you should have said, explain to me how this accident is non-preventable.
Council
If you can't answer that question, how can we have confidence in you doing a good investigation?
Council President, Councilor Sanchez, that is not the way the process works involving a traffic crash. I do not oversee the traffic unit. I do not oversee traffic crashes. Traffic crashes are their own separate category.
But you oversee the entire investigation.
Excuse me, sir, would you let me finish?
You're one of the highest ranking officers in the city of Albuquerque. You should be able to answer this question.
Councilor Sanchez, I do not make a decision on whether an accident is preventable or non-preventable. I get the results from the Crash Review Board, and then we impose discipline as necessary. This was ruled non-preventable. I cannot overrule the board. That is not authority that I have.
That's exactly what we mean when we see an accident that should be handled by an outside entity. Is this accident is not getting the scrutiny or the eyes that it should get, and it's not getting what it needs to get in reference to a true, fair, transparent investigation. That's what I'm hearing from you right now.
Councilor Lewis. Other questions? We got Councilor Champagne.
Thank you, Mr. President. Deputy Chief, just two questions really quick. Since the Crash Review Board, well, first, does the Crash Review Board still make up of uniform officers, a commander, sergeant, an officer? Is that what the review board is made of?
Council President, Councilor Champagne, that is correct. The commander of traffic chairs that board, and then there are various members of traffic, including somebody from Fleet, from Operations Review, and the Fleet Safety Manager from Risk Management that's assigned to ABD.
So there are civilians as well as sworn officers?
That is correct.
Now that they've come down with a decision, are there details to the findings of why they issued a non-preventable accident?
Council President, Councilor Champagne, in the minutes that I receive, there is nothing that dictates or tells me why they came up to a non-preventable decision. Only preventable decisions on preventable accidents is given a narrative in the memo.
Mr. President, is there a way we, as a council, can find their justification in this ruling or this finding?
Council President, Councilor Champagne, let me call up Sergeant Burton. He may have a little more information on the process involved with the Crash Review Board.
Thank you, Council. In regards to your question, I believe we could locate the notes on those and provide those to you. I wouldn't have those on me right at this very moment, but I believe that is something that we could provide to you at a later date and time. We just have to request it. Usually there are notes taken.
Okay, Mr. President and Sergeant, so I understand. I understand that the IA does not receive those findings or the notes of it, but it is detailed in the report of the findings, Sergeant?
And so what I will say on this one, and I apologize, it's because I was directly involved in this case, I had no part. Sometimes I do sit on that board, sometimes I do not, so I could not verify for you 100% what notes were taken in this one, but I could absolutely find out for you and provide that information to be provided to you. But because I did not sit on this specific board, because I was directly involved in the investigation, I wouldn't be able to attest to what notes, if any, were taken in regards to this one.
Okay. And last question, Mr. President. The board is made up of how many, the review board is made up of how many individuals?
Council President, Councilor Champlain, this board is made up of 5 individuals.
How many are sworn officers?
There were 4 sworn officers and 1 civilian personnel.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, let's just make this our official request then. Not just for notes that were taken, but a clear response on the reason for deeming the accident the way that they did. We'd like to officially request that from y'all. Even if there were no notes taken, I think it'd be appropriate for that board to demonstrate and give reasons for their conclusion. Councilor Bassan.
Mr. President, to add to what you just said, I would think it would be great, and it might not be possible, but it would be great if we could have some kind of answer when we get to this piece of legislation tonight, if that's possible.
Councilor Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. President. For a point of clarification, council we don't automatically get, we can't get the whole file that you're sending to the Department of Justice or State Police or all of the other entities that you're sending the complete file to?
Mr.
Can we also
President.
receive that?
Mr. President, Councilor Rogers, the investigation report from Sergeant Burton that was submitted as the complete file is absolutely a public record, so there is no reason we cannot provide that to you.
Councilor Sanchez. We'll move on to other questions.
I just have one more question, and this is for Ms. Sengel. Ms. Sengel, is every single person that's involved in this investigation and the review process, the disciplinary process, the IA process, the accident process, are all of these individuals subordinates of Chief Medina?
Mr. President and Councilor Sanchez, the Superintendent of Police Reform reports to Kevin Sarasow, who reports to me. So Chief Medina is not in his chain of command, and therefore I would say they do, IA and Superintendent of Police Reform does not report to Chief Medina.
Let me rephrase that. Does everybody that I just mentioned, are they a subordinate of Mayor Keller?
Mr. President, Councilor Sanchez, everyone that you mentioned in your list do work for the administration.
So how can you assure us that you are giving us an honest and fair and transparent investigation?
Mr. President and Councilor Sanchez, I think that it's important to remember that the administration's responsibility is to oversee personnel, and therefore we have a responsibility to the public to ensure that that is the case. And I want to be sure that was clear that we are inviting others to participate in the review of this process. The state police are invited to review the accident report and the case that was submitted to the district attorney's office. The district attorney's office has that case, which is completed by our investigators, therefore is an independent review. Our independent monitor, which has been approved by the Department of Justice as an independent monitor for us to continue compliance as we go forward, will review this in Judge Victor Valdez. And then lastly, we will be inviting the Department of Justice, which we have no authority over and no ability to direct, to also review this in this monitoring period.
And that's the review of everything based on how it's done. The investigation is before all of these reviews. The investigators are still working under the administration. That's my point.
So, maybe it's a question for our staff, maybe to look at. I mean, is this something that, I mean, it sounds like the administration has left it open to the DA, maybe to the state police, to review this investigation if they would like to, but would it be within the purview of the council that we would officially request the state police, the county sheriff's office, or the DA, and ask them specifically to do an investigation? I mean, I think that'd be something that this council could request as well. I don't know, maybe Kevin could look into that for us. So I think we have several members of the crash review board, and I think no other questions from the councilors at least. But if any of the members of the board would like to address maybe some of the questions that we had earlier, they're welcome to do that.
Mr. President, the commander is here, Commander Martinez, and one of the other members of the crash review board, Mr. Sergeant Stone. Is that right? Yeah, Lieutenant.
Commander, I think the intent would not to argue about the decision or but to understand at least a little bit more detail into here's how we came to this conclusion and this is the evidence of it that we came to.
Okay. Council President, Council Sanchez, Commander Martinez, Albuquerque Police Department. So, reference this crash. It was the chief of police. So this crash shouldn't have been in front of the crash review board, but with it being the high-profile case that it is, we chose not to leave any loopholes, have any questions, so we're going through every process we can to have this case looked at, to be reviewed, to see if there's anything of question or that needs to be looked at that was missed by somebody throughout this process. I have all the respect and faith in the fatal crash team's investigation that they do, not only for this crash, but the ones they do for the citizens of Albuquerque. They do a very good job of what they do. So now I'll turn it over to Sergeant Stone to explain the process of what happens inside of Crash Review Board.
So the Crash Review Board is a committee that meets. Commander Martinez is the chair. It's comprised of the traffic lieutenant, which I'm the acting lieutenant for at this point, so I was on the board. And then it's a traffic sergeant, one of the traffic officers, motor officer, and then the safety officer, Frank Lanas, and then one of the members from Officer View that's in charge of fleet. So the board meets, reviews the crash reports from all the department vehicles, all the officers that are involved in a crash, and then they read over the report. They'll listen to testimony from the officers if they wish to do so, and then they take a vote on the crash. So that's the purpose of the board.
Did you listen to testimony from the chief?
Yes, he did present his testimony.
And any other testimony that you had?
No, he was the only one allowed to testify towards his crash.
Okay. So did the other parties testify, or did you?
No, the other parties review the crash report, listen to the testimony, and then we take a vote.
So you reviewed their testimony?
Well, we listened to the testimony of Chief Medina when he came in.
Gotcha, okay. And you concluded what?
We determined that was a non-preventable crash.
A non what again?
Non-preventable crash?
Non-preventable crash. So what is the criteria of a non-preventable crash or and a preventable crash?
Okay, I'm going to read the definitions for you
Okay.
from SOP for non-preventable crash and preventable crash. So the non-preventable crash, a crash that involved a motor vehicle that could not have been averted by an act or failure to act by the driver when the driver exercised normal judgment and foresight and was unable to avoid it, or which steps would have risked causing another kind of mishap. That's a non-preventable crash.
Can you read that one more time? So this is a non-preventable, which you concluded it was non-preventable.
Yes.
Read that one more time.
A crash that involved a motor vehicle that could not have been averted by an act or failure to act by the driver when the driver exercised normal judgment and foresight and was unable to avoid it, or which steps would have risked causing another kind of mishap.
And I guess, can you describe why the board came to the conclusion that this crash met that criteria?
I can't testify to the other board members on their vote. I can testify to mine. So averted by an act, I think Chief Medina did take an act when faced with an immediate threat of a firearm in his line of sight. I'm sure myself and other officers, if you can't engage a threat, if there's something, he was in the line of traffic, his wife was in the vehicle. I don't think he could have engaged that target. Myself, I would have moved forward to get out of the immediate threat. That's part of my decision on why it was non-preventable. He did take an act, and then I think he exercised normal judgment and foresight, getting out of the way of a firearm. We know there was a firearm. We know there was altercation, and we know there was a shot fired. So that was my decision. I can't say.
Did any of the members of the review board have a contrary
No, the
conclusion to
the vote was unanimous, and we all voted the same. But
Did anybody discuss maybe challenging the fact that it might not be preventable?
No.
Does everybody on that review board fall into the mayor's purview or the chief's purview?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Does everybody on that review board fall under the chief's purview?
I believe so. Well, we have the safety officer that, if he falls under the chief.
And nobody challenged it in any way?
There was no challenge, no. It was like I said, we all voted the same.
Okay, councilors. Councilor Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we interview the victim, or the person on the other end?
Not for the crash review board, no. This is just to determine if the crash was preventable or non-preventable. The victim would be interviewed by the actual crash investigation, which was conducted by the fatal crash team.
Thank you.
Do you have the definition of a preventable crash?
Yes, preventable crash. A crash in which the driver failed to do everything that reasonably could have been done to avoid the crash. And if a driver who exercises normal judgment and foresight could have foreseen the possibility of the crash and avoided it by taking steps within their control, which would have not risked causing another kind of mishap.
And so the conclusion was that there's absolutely no way this could have been avoided, that the driver could have done absolutely nothing to avoid that crash.
I can't say to the decision that Chief Medina made, but as far as getting out of an immediate threat, and based on the videos that I saw in the report, him entering the intersection, I think a crash, it was unavoidable.
Did y'all take any notes?
In crash review board?
Any notes from the meeting that you had?
We have a list that of all the officers' name, and there's check marks for the preventable crashes, non-preventable crashes, and then there's some codes that we get from the safety officer that has to do with the damage of the vehicles and that kind of stuff.
Okay, Councilor Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can we get those definitions just in writing? Like, can we get a copy of those definitions? Because hearing the initial one, it brings up so many more questions for me, especially following too close could be non-preventable, like just, so I just want to, I need to digest those a little bit if we can get those in writing.
I gave a copy of the SOP and the definitions are in there.
Mr. President, Councilor Rogers, these are the police department's SOPs related to crash review board. So they are the SOPs that are applied to every single crash that is reviewed. So we'll make sure you have a copy. I also now have 9 copies of the case that was submitted to the case finder, and so we'll make, or case seeker, and we will hand those to you as well.
All right, Councilor Sanchez, quickly, we'll wrap up here.
Thank you, Mr. President. The question I have is, I know you said that the vote was unanimous. Did anybody ask any questions of the chief at all during this investigation?
I believe there were some questions from the board members. I can't remember the exact questions that
Do
were
we
asked.
have those questions
No.
somewhere?
They're not written down, no.
Do you know which board member asked the question?
I can't recall at this time.
But you don't know any of the questions that were asked?
Like I said, I don't remember the exact questions
Who
that were asked,
oversees
and
the
I'm not
board?
going to. Commander
I do.
Martinez.
Have you, do you have any notes that you took in reference to the other questions that were asked?
No, sir, I do not,
Why not?
because I didn't take notes. We don't take notes in there. We go off of the narrative that's provided. I chair it. I'm not a voting member. I'm there to document what is said and done in there.
So how many
And that's my
questions would
part.
you say were asked?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Because some of the sure questions that should have been asked was Chief Medina in a dangerous situation? And what deemed the fact that he was in a dangerous situation? You don't even go into the detail in reference to your accident investigation board on what exactly caused the accident. All you do is just let him speak, and then everybody voted, and they were unanimous, and you'd have no idea what questions were asked. Some of the main questions that should have been asked is, were you in an unmarked car? Yes. Were you in a dangerous situation? Did that person recognize you as a police officer? We don't know those questions. Did anybody ask those questions? We have no idea to know. If you're in an unmarked car and nobody recognized you, there was a good chance that every single person in that area who was in an unmarked car did not deem to be a threat to those individuals, or did think that they were in a threatening situation. Only one person with all these cars around thought they were in a dangerous situation. So
Councilor Sanchez, I'm
there
sorry.
seems to be a lot of things missing from your investigation. So
Councilor Sanchez, I want to try to stay away from just criticizing the decision that you made or the process, but more of, I think the questions are appropriate though, and understanding your process, and you can imagine why. This would be certainly appropriate for us to understand the process and if it's a good process or not, if it's fair but non-biased process. But Commander, you answer directly to the chief?
Directly to the chief?
Yeah.
I have a deputy chief and then the chief, yes, sir.
So the chief gives you a review each year?
I think my DC gives it to me and then it goes up.
Yeah.
I know I am reviewed, yes.
Yeah, but you answer to him for your job performance.
Sure,
And Sergeant, is the commander your supervisor?
Yes,
Yep, so you get a review each year?
yes,
Okay, he gives you a review?
yes.
Again, you can imagine why there'd be questions regarding this, right? So, I think Councilor Champlain.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one question, Commander. You made a statement when you first got here, and you said that this shouldn't have gone in front of you, in front of the crash review board.
Yes.
Why is that?
Because it was a serious injury crash.
Where should it have gone?
They should have just stayed with the fatal crash team, and then they do their review, write it up, and it goes to the DA's office, and they review it.
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
So the fatal crash team shows up to the crash, they investigate it. I don't want to misspeak here. So initially, we got the call for the crash, right?
Yes, sir.
So we got to the crash. We find out what the injuries are. It's a serious injury crash, so we go out, we do the investigation for that. So that investigation is completed, stays in-house with the fatal team. They conduct their investigation, they write up their sup out. Then they get that, they submit it to case catcher, it goes to the DA's office. The DA's office reviews that case to see if we've missed anything, if anything's to be charged. If they find anything that's chargeable that we didn't see, then they can proceed with those charges. But being as this case is the high-profile case, as the President mentioned, everybody's doing everything in their due diligence to make sure they do not mess up in this investigation, and the blue team was conducted for this crash. So off of those blue teams, that's how we get the crashes in the crash review board. So with that, adds the other layer of review of making sure that we don't miss anything and everything is accounted for and looked at.
Have you had to do crash reviews for deputy chiefs and chiefs in the past? Or is this the first one you've ever had to do of a supervisor?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember, to be honest with you. But we have sergeants, lieutenants, everybody who drives a police vehicle comes through crash review board, as you well know.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple more questions. I just find it impossible to believe that that this review board would challenge the person standing before you all. I mean, I just find it impossible to believe that a fair challenge or a good, tough, you could call it tough, but just honest questioning would happen in this regard, which was the reason why, this council was, requesting a different process, So again, not to be critical of you all, I think you guys are doing your job, but I think you would be facing an impossible situation in that regard. So, we'll go to Councilor Bassan.
Mr. President, so this has gone to the crash review board. Did the fatal crash unit, do they conduct an investigation normally? Is that
For
what
a
you were?
serious injury crash, yes, ma'am, they do.
So what you were saying is typically it would go to the fatal crash unit to have an investigation for an accident like this, if
Yes.
it didn't involve the chief and all of that?
Yeah, no matter who it is, if there's a serious injury crash, they investigate that crash.
Okay, and so because it did involve the chief, it went to the crash review board.
Yes. for
Did the
extra
fatal
review.
crash unit also conduct a traditional investigation,
Yes,
or
they
did
did.
that? And
They
that's
did.
what this is here? That's,
Mr. President, Councilor Bassan, what you have in front of you is the investigation case that was sent to the DA's office from the motors unit, the fatal unit that did the investigation. And so I also want to, if you don't mind, interject that part of why we want to invite the state police to review the documents and the investigation to ensure that it was thorough, as well as the DA's office now obviously has the opportunity, as stated by the commander, to review that investigation and determine if it was thorough, it met the criteria and the thoroughness. And then again, we do intend to have an independent monitor, as well as invite the DOJ to include it in their monitoring. So our intent is for this to have multiple outside views.
Okay, Councilor Champagne.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. I always do not say your name right, and I apologize. Single. If all these steps are being taken now for the outside agencies to review an internal investigation, why not request an outside agency to do the investigation?
Mr. President and Councilor Champagne, I think our intent is to comply with what we have set out in standard accepted by the Department of Justice, the processes by which we investigate and apply discipline across all officers of the Albuquerque Police Department as a result of the CASA. And it was important to us to utilize what we have laid out for independent monitoring to ensure that we continue to reinforce that this process is intended to provide an appropriate internal affairs investigation process through the Superintendent of Police Reform.
All right, councilors, anything else? Thank you all.